60,000 phones, one tower, and a single 64 antenna array steering dozens of focused beams so a packed stadium stays online. No new towers, no extra spectrum. Here is exactly how it works. An old-style tower does one blunt thing. It sprays a single signal over the whole crowd. Everyone shares the same pipe. So the moment a stadium fills, speeds crater. Video freezes, loaders spin, and payment terminals go dead exactly when 60,000 people all reach for their phones at once. Why does one signal choke like that? Start with the old antenna. Picture a single floodlight bolted to the tower, throwing one wide wash of light across a whole slice of the crowd. That is a traditional cell antenna. It broadcasts in one broad sector, and it has no way to aim energy at your phone specifically. Your signal and everyone else's ride the exact same beam of radio. So every phone in that sector is competing for the same airtime, taking turns like cars merging into one lane. When 10 people share it, fine. When 10,000 share it, the lane jams. Here is the core problem. The floodlight cannot distinguish one phone from the next. It only knows the whole crowd. There is no steering, no focus, no privacy for your data stream. It is one signal doing its best to be everywhere at once, which means it is truly strong nowhere. This single, unfocused floodlight is the exact bottleneck that massive MIMO was built to break. So how do you turn a floodlight into something that can find one seat? Now the fix. Massive MIMO throws out the single floodlight and replaces it with a grid. 64 tiny antenna elements packed into one panel, usually laid out 8 across and 8 down. The name sounds like jargon, so let us open it. MIMO stands for multiple input, multiple output. Many antennas sending and many receiving instead of just one of each. The word massive only means the count is dozens of elements, not the 2 or 4 older phones and towers used. That is the whole term. Here is the part people miss. Each of those 64 elements is its own small, independent radiator. It is not one big dish carved into pieces. Every element can send its own copy of the signal, on its own timing under the tower's control. So instead of one floodlight, you now have a wall of 64 tiny flashlights, each one you can switch and time separately. On its own, one tiny element is weak. But 64 of them, working together in perfect coordination, can do something a single floodlight never could. And that coordination is where the real trick lives. This is where it gets clever. To aim at one phone, the tower sends the same signal out of all 64 elements, but it fires each one at a very slightly different moment. Nudge the timing of each element by a hair, and the radio waves start to cooperate. In one chosen direction, the crests of all 64 waves line up and stack on top of each other, adding up into one strong, narrow beam pointed straight at a single phone. In every other direction, the waves fall out of step and cancel each other out to almost nothing. Same energy, but now focused instead of sprayed. This aiming by timing is called beamforming. Think of a choir of synchronized speakers all playing one note. If they all fire at once, the sound goes everywhere. But delay each speaker by a few thousandths of a second in just the right pattern, and the sound converges on one specific seat in the hall. Loud there, quiet everywhere else. The tower does exactly that with radio. It isn't shouting louder. It is timing 64 whispers so they meet at your phone and nowhere else. So if the beam is shaped by timing alone, what stops the tower from making many beams at once? Here is the payoff of doing it with timing. Because the beam is steered by math, by choosing the delays, and not by physically swiveling the panel, the tower can build many beams at the same instant. It just runs the calculation for several targets in parallel and adds the patterns together. One array, dozens of beams, each aimed at a different phone, all on the very same frequency. Instead of one signal sprayed at everyone, you get dozens of private spotlights, each tracking one person. And phones move. You walk up the stairs, you turn to your seat, you hold the phone at a new angle. The array simply recomputes the timing and repoints your beam, thousands of times a second, so the spotlight follows you. It is like a lighting rig that can conjure 50 separate spotlights out of thin air and keep every one of them locked on a different moving dancer. No motors, no moving parts, just numbers changing. Add a new callers. Spin up another beam. Someone hangs up. Free that beam for the next phone. But there is a deeper win hiding here, one that actually multiplies how much the tower can carry. Now the deeper wins. Take 2 phones sitting in totally different directions from the tower. One high in the stands, one down near the field. Their beams point away from each other and never overlap. So the tower can hand both phones the exact same frequency at the same moment, and neither one interferes with the other. In old systems, that was forbidden. 2 users, 1 frequency meant a collision. Here, because the beams live in different directions in space, the same channel gets reused over and over. This trick of reusing one frequency across many separated beams is called spatial multiplexing. Do it across dozens of beams, and you multiply the tower's total capacity several times over, without buying a single slice of new spectrum. But steering needs aim, and aim needs feedback. So each phone constantly measures the signal it receives and reports back to the tower. How strong, from what direction, with what distortion. The tower reads that report and fine-tunes the timing to keep every beam locked tight on its target. The phones, in effect, help aim the very beams that serve them. Now watch the whole thing click together. 64 tiny elements give the tower fingers. Beamforming lets those fingers time their waves into tight, aimed beams. Spatial reuse lets dozens of those beams share one frequency because they point different ways. Stack all three and one ordinary tower stops being a single shared pipe and becomes dozens of private lanes, each carved out of thin air and pointed at one phone. That is why a stadium of 60,000 phones doesn't collapse. Each person isn't fighting the whole crowd for one floodlight anymore. Each person has their own focused beam, their own lane, tracking them seat to seat. The magic was never a wider spray. It was the opposite. Energy pulled into narrow, steered beams, one per phone. Focused beams, not a bigger broadcast, are exactly what keep the packed stadium online. One tower quietly acting like dozens. So here is the one thing to carry out of this. When your phone flies through a jammed stadium or a packed train platform, it usually isn't because the tower got more powerful. It's because the tower got smarter about aim, splitting one signal into many focused beams and handing you your own. Next time your data holds up in a huge crowd, you'll know the real reason. Not a louder tower, but a tower that learned to point. Strength was never the trick. Precision was. So that's the whole trick. Split one tower into steerable beams, and everyone in the crowd gets their own private lane. Now here is the next thread to pull. 5G takes the same idea and pushes it harder. Much higher frequencies and even bigger arrays, hundreds of elements, which unlocks blistering speed but comes with a strange new problem. Those signals barely make it through a wall. That's the next box we'll open.